Now when men begin to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters are born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives whomever they chose. So the Lord said, My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal, and his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and afterward as well, when the sons of God had relations with the daughters of men, and they bore children who became mighty men of old, men of renown. Twister Christian, hey, I'm here to talk about giants. I'm here to talk about where are all the bones of the giants if giants existed. So that's going to be a topic today, and I'm going to be very brief because there's already a lot of information, a lot of studies, a lot of videos on this subject. But I'm going to come to you just a little bit differently because we have to look at this, we have to investigate this to a certain point. And as many of you know, I do have a project called the Grigori and also Grigori Legends, and we're also working on other multiple projects. But the story of the Grigori deals with Genesis chapter 6 and many other scriptures in the Bible and also ancient texts. That is a project that we are working on. The link is down below in the description, and you can check on it. You can support us in that effort to create what the artwork that you've been seeing over here for the last minute is dealing with the Grigori project. All right, so the first question is, and for many people, whether if you don't believe in the Bible or if you are a believer in the Bible, and a lot of this was not taught in church. I didn't know anything about Genesis 6 until I started to really get into advanced teachings and things like that, where because you're not going to hear the most that you ever hear is Goliath being preached in mainstream Christianity. All right, so this is what we're going to, these are the questions that I had. Of course, did they exist? What type of physical evidence is there of these particular types of giants, right? And those are the questions that we have to ask because in Scripture, it talks about these giants that were very large, and the people of God were always in constant battles with these beings. So we also look at the other pieces of evidences that we look at is what does historical records say about giants, right? And all of this is circumstantial because when I used to do investigations, you have circumstantial evidence and then you have direct evidence. It's circumstantial. It could relate to pointing or supporting direct evidence. So in all of this, also too that we don't have any DNA, and I know there's a lot of conspiracies out there considering about giants and about the Smithsonian and governments covering up giant bones and so forth, which is very plausible considering of all the circumstantial evidence that is out there. We have the historical records. We have biblical, Sumerian, Egyptian, Akkadian. You have the historical, you have Asian historical documents that talk about giants. So it's in across all cultures and everything. And a lot of people say, well, sometimes they would make up stories to keep the enemies away and everything. But that's why we just say right now that no matter what the ancient artwork depicts or any other type of circumstantial evidence, right now we don't have any physical evidence. Now, in times there have been people who have took the bones of giants and took them everywhere as far as for circuses and stuff like that, showing off the bones or showing off the body. But we don't really know for a fact that we don't have, there are bones. You look like the Locklove skull, right? Then you have some femurs that are extra large. But this is what we're really looking for. And what we're really looking for because as you can see this picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Wilt Chamberlain, and Andre the Giant, humans can get pretty big, right? They can also get very small, right? They're on the big end. So even if there are multiple documents or newspaper articles referring to anybody between 7 and 8 feet tall, that to me does not mean anything. It just means that there are really tall humans, right? Because after you get to, and I'll show you here in a moment, But there are some very tall people in this world. One of the things that I'm going to get into is when we look at circumstantial evidence, and this is going back in history here within the United States, and I'm just on the Library of Congress, and you can research just about any topic from newspapers from 1789 all the way through 1963. And time after time after time, you will constantly find news articles dealing with giant human skeletons found. So just to give you an idea, right, this was July 11th, 1919, of the Coconut Sun. So doing a word search, you could do word searches. Here we have a giant skeleton 18 feet tall at Austin, Texas. A giant skeleton 18 feet tall. If the report that the fossilized skeleton of a giant 18-foot tall has been found near Seymour, Texas is true, it is the most important ethnological discovery ever made in the world, remarked Dr. J.E. Pierce, professor of anthropology at the University of Texas. It would break all previous records of giants by nearly 10 feet, as the tallest man known to anthropological research was only 8 feet 5 inches in height. The skeleton is possession of W.J. McKinley, Houston, Texas, oil inspector who found it, who has been seen by a number of people who vouch for the truth of the size of the relic of a heretofore unknown race. This is one out of hundreds upon hundreds of news articles, and this is just the United States. That doesn't. There are actually reports. Any country that has any type of research that you can do in looking up old newspapers and stuff like that will have similar accounts concerning their particular government or country. All right, this is 1893. This is from the Indianapolis Journal. At Triolo, a castle of the Upper Calabria, some laborers discovered in a garden an entire skeleton measuring 18 feet in length. The head was 2.5 feet long, each molar tooth weighed literally over 1 ounce, and each of the other teeth upward of 1/4 of an ounce. Philazus, in the history of Sicily, says that in a field about a mile south of Marino in Sicily was found a skeleton 30 feet high, and the head, which was the size of a hogshead, and each of the teeth were weighed 5 ounces. Another skeleton 30 feet long was found in Sicily, not far from Palermo, in 1548, and another in 1550, 33 feet in length. All right, and it just goes on to talk about more giants that they've found. So this is a news article. You even have some from the New York Times, published May 4th, 1908. Charles C. Clapp, who recently returned from Mexico, where he has been in the charge of Thomas Lawson's mining interest, has called the attention of Professor Iglesias to a remarkable discovery made by him. He found in Mexico a cave containing 200 skeletons of men above 8 feet in height. The cave was evidently buried a place of a race of giants antedated the Aztecs. So here they found a whole bunch of people that were very tall, right? Over 8 feet. And like I said, 8 feet, hey, that's really doable as far as for a human being. But it's just one example out of multiple examples. Another article, February 11th, 1902, owing to the discovery, this is New York Times, giant skeletons found. Archaeologists to send expedition to explore graveyards in New Mexico where bodies were unearthed. The ancient burial plot discovered 2 stones that bore curious inscriptions, and beneath them were found in shallow excavations the bones of a frame that could not have been less than 12 feet in length. This is what I call circumstantial evidence when we're dealing with, we're doing our research, right? You have your ancient history, your biblical, your Sumerian, your different accounts, ancient, whether it's oral or even written in stone, Egyptian, whatever the case. And over time, there are written records of encounters with giants. So this is on, like I said, this is the Library of Congress. It's called Chronicling America, right? The Library of Congress. You could type it in, and it'll pull it up. You could do research on just about, as long as it can pull up, depending on how you do your word search is how things are going to come up. So there's literally, depending on how you search, there's anywhere from 20 to 100 or several hundred articles dealing with giants. So that's one of the things. Like I said, it's circumstantial evidence. So we've established. So we already know ancient history, and now we look at the United States history as far as what they've either found here or outside the United States. We saw where in Italy they were claiming to find giants, and so they had Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, Darwin. Those were people that were, science was advancing. So it wasn't like these scientists were stupid in reporting these, because as you can see, we're reading names of scientists that are involved in this. Scientists aren't going to put or archaeologists, they're not going to put their name on something, and then it's a big hoax. So, but, it's very well, and people have said, well, maybe the media just sensationalized it. And that's very possible. There might be some cases where that's actually happening. All right, so then we look at other evidence, right? There are, what we see here, there are footprints from all around the world. And there are in various places. Now, a lot of people discuss about giants that there's the pre-flood giants and the after-flood giants. And the pre-flood giants are the Nephilim. And the Nephilim are the ones that were the biggest giants. And if you look at the word Enoch, in the word Enoch were the forefathers of the Anakim. The Bible describes them as very tall descendants of the Nephilim. Right? So there's a distinction between the Anakim, the Anak, and the Nephilim. So then you also have the Rephaites as well. These are all descendants. Everything that you see after the Nephilim, the Anak, the Anakims, these are all descendants of the Nephilim. Right? Before the flood, after the flood. The original giants eventually died out, and somehow, some way, their offspring lived through the flood. Right? A lot of people say the angels came back down after that and started back all over again. So, and then other people will argue that the flood was not, if you actually study, a lot of people, they tell me they studied the Bible from a Hebrew perspective, and the words that were being used during those time periods, and the flood was actually a local flood that covered a lot of the Middle East, and a lot of Africa, and a lot of other places. And that's why that place is just like a lot of that place was just a straight desert because of the flood. So just going back, just looking, any of these type of footprints, this is circumstantial evidence, because you don't actually, when people find footprints of a giant foot, you don't have scientists or archaeologists go out there and they're investigating it. But for dinosaur tracks and Cro-Magnon or Neanderthal, they'll go out and inspect those and scientifically validate those. But when somebody finds something, right, and you see this top picture here, this is a guy standing next to a very large footprint that is somewhere in Asia. There's a lot of footprints you can see here. Some other footprints. You can see the difference in the size, right? You have, I remember this one when this came out, and where people found these tracks, and people if people can try to fake those, but there you know that there's a difference. You can spot the difference, but they're not going out to investigate any of these. And then you have others, and there's a lot more out there, all over the world, where these footprints were fossilized. There was even one that I found in a biblical archaeological journal back from 1982, and I tried to contact the professor. She never responded about it, because I was trying to find an original copy of the actual archaeological report and trying to get my hands on it, and it's almost nearly impossible. So there are footprints everywhere. This is just a small sample throughout the last 30, 40, 50 years. Before this really became a really hot topic in recent times. I look at that as circumstantial evidence. So moving on, let's look at what people look like and how they look when they're 8 feet tall, right? And you have Robert Wadlow, and he was one of the tallest men ever to live. And this is the question that I ask everybody: is, the Nephilim were distinctly different. Bone structure from reports distinctively different, right? If this guy was even close to the height of Goliath, do you think that this guy could wield a sword? You think this guy could wield a shield? No, he had that a lot of his life he had to have a cane just to walk. So these people here are just very tall humans. That's why when they say there's graves with these giants that were 7'2", well, we know that we also know that Andre the Giant and Wilt Chamberlain, they were both pretty tall. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a very big guy, but in this picture, you compare and see, and is this what they meant by when the spies went into the land, that these guys were this big, or were they really big? And that's the evidence that we're looking for. We have plenty of evidence that they were 7 foot tall people, there were 8 foot tall people, but you're looking for an entire race of tall people. Now, as time went on after the flood, we have the descendants, right? It kept seeing descendants of this group, descendants of the Nephilim, descendants of the Anakims, right? As time went on, the giants would get smaller and smaller because their DNA is being watered down as they procreate, right? And there are no more angels, at least at that time, that were still mating with women and having the original giants. As far as circumstantial evidence, looking at ancient history, looking at the news articles, looking at footprints, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence. And so where are all the bones? Right? Okay, if you look at the bones that have allegedly been found here in the United States in the last 200 years, according to a lot of these newspaper reports, where have they all gone? Right? And I suspect since it was pretty much the norm, and this is what you have to think, the norm in American thinking back between the 1800s and the early 1900s that giants existed. They probably discussed it in school, right? They considered giants another part of another branch off of the human race. So that was the thinking, because they wouldn't be publishing all those articles. Even the New York Times and even some of the major newspapers are still around today. They've published those articles in the way past. So I have pictures of, this is Robert Wadlow, and these are some other very tall people, right? And a lot of people claim these are Nephilim, right? And these guys could not fight in a battle. None of these guys, they all have to walk with canes. They're not going to be wielding shields and swords and running into battle, right? So obviously there's a major distinction between tall humans and Nephilim and their descendants. So there's just a lot of misinformation out there, and especially there's a lot of groups like on Facebook that just show they show a lot of fake pictures, and I've showed some of them already, and there are many of them, and there are people trying to make it seem like these are real giants, and to the point to where if they ever did find a real giant, people probably wouldn't even believe it, because there've been so much false information put out about the situation. So these giants here are not the giants that we are looking for, right? We're not looking for tall humans. We're looking for a distinct race, more than likely thicker boned, right? And their DNA is going to be different, because folks, if you really do the studies of what happened in Genesis 6, when the angels came down, they were able to mate with the women. And we know in the Bible that angels can come down and they can eat and drink like they did with Lot, right? They can eat and drink food. So they had human flesh. When they enter into this realm, into our domain, they are physical beings who can mate, eat, and drink, right? So the DNA of these giants are going to be slightly different, right? You're going to see human DNA in these, because it says that, because the wife or the women that they chose. So you have the woman's DNA, and you have the angel who's in the physical form. They're procreating, and what comes out of that is the giants, right? So when you go into the book, when you go further into one of the original books of the Bible, the book of Enoch, it details the entire story. So it wasn't like people like these guys here were running out in the battlefield. Goliath could probably defeat all these guys right here in one swipe. So, and even today, they claim every now and then, we go over the last 50 years, they've found different different offshoots of human beings. Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon, the denizens. So there's different ones, and they can confirm that with DNA, and that's going to be the most important. If they did find bones right now, they definitely would be checking the DNA, right? But that's the thing. And where are all the bones, right? And we know from the story of the biblical story, Moses traveled from Egypt through the wilderness, but at the same time, what happened is that all these offsprings of the Nephilim was in the land of Canaan. You remember the 12 spies. They spied in, and so they had to go around the promised land for 40 years. And during that time, they did battle other groups of people and maybe even biblical tribes. But when they got into Canaan, they sure did fight the descendants of the Nephilim. Right? You got the Battle of Jericho. This is after Moses had passed away and Joshua went in, and the path that they took, and they took out all these cities and they ran them off. And that's why you have Goliath, who was the Philistines, because when all the giants, they were literally, if you read the stories of the battles that took place in the Bible, you will see why the giants began to run. If they heard they were coming, I bet you some of them giants ran. And you really get into the story, you will see there were I could imagine some of the fights or some of the battles that took place, right? So we got here where they went to all these cities. So in this whole entire area, in all of Israel, I mean, think about it. While the Hebrews were enslaved for 400 years, which Egyptians do have writings about confrontations with giants. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. There's documentation. But there should be giants all over Israel for 400 years. Right? Even after the Hebrews were captured, they were put in captivity for 400 years. That gave these giants time to continue to grow, continue to procreate. And so a lot of these tribes would have had to have been massive by that time. And so these, like I said, these giants are a little bit different. That's why you get all these mythical heroes, like in the Greek and in other religions and stuff. These are like half human, Hercules and all this stuff. That's where all those stories come from, is that it's coming out from this particular story. So what happened is when Joshua came and started here, and they were going through the promised land, taking back the land of Israel, and fighting all these biblical giant tribes. So they begin to spread out and go and join different factions, and maybe even go over into the world. And that's why we have like the story of the legends, right? The Peyote tribe, and we deal with the giants that were in North America. You hear the stories in South America. You hear the stories on the west coast of California and other places all around the world, where they just eventually spread out because they were basically running. They were either running or they had been defeated, and they basically expelled from the land, and they went and ventured out. But and that's where I said that's where Goliath came from, with the Philistines. So the Philistines were human, but they had Nephilim, or should I say Anakims, who are the descendants that were in the camp. They were in the camps of the enemies of Israel. Right? Wasn't as many, because they were wiping them. Joshua wiped them, a lot of them out. And then you have the king of Og, who was the last of the Rephaim. He was a direct descendant of the Nephilim. So this is where I believe that they're going to find. And why haven't they found any giants? There should be so many. If you look at pre-flood, okay, people say, well, the flood wiped everything away. But how many years did it take for Noah to build the ark? And before then were giant, and you got to remember, the giants were there in the days of Jared, when the angels came down. When they first came down, it was the days of Jared. So you have all these years, hundreds and hundreds of years that went by. You had giants that lived and died there in that whole entire area. Before the flood, after the flood, Obviously, some of them have to be buried in tombs and so forth. So then you have, during that whole time period of the 400 years, while all the giants were in the land, they were in the promised land, they were living and dying of old age, whatever that age was. The book of Enoch says that the giants the original Nephilim giants lived up to 500 years. So as the DNA strand gets weaker and weaker, they probably didn't live as long. But all throughout Israel, there should be, I don't even know what to say, but there should be so many bones of giants everywhere. Just like people should just be walking and finding bones. Now Josephus even wrote about the giants, about the display of giants, the display of giant bones, right? So people can remember the history in the past. So he wrote about something that he saw, that they were still there today. The giants of the bones of giants were still there today. But see, what happens is history gets lost, and then now we're on the path of rediscovering history. So that, folks, the giants exist, and what type of evidence is out there. And the main thing is that we don't have any physical bones. Now, folks, we still make this discoveries of species all the time, new species, rediscovering of old species. It's just a matter of time before something does come out that's going to confirm that, if they did exist. So you look at the path and where those battles took place. There has to be giants. There has to be giant bones everywhere. And that's where they're going to be at. If they're going to be anywhere, they're going to be in Israel, in the immediate area surrounding Israel. Right, talking about Syria, Jordan, just that whole Middle Eastern area, Iran. There should be plenty of bones of giants in those areas. Now, whether or not if they're doing everything they can when somebody comes across something, but it blows my mind that it's not a normal occurrence to find giant bones in Israel. So I wonder, and I pray about it, and I think about it. God, you're ever going to release this information? We have all the circumstantial evidence, but we don't have any direct evidence that we know about. We don't have any DNA that at least that we don't know about. And you should find just about every type of giant that's in existence, right? And I know that there was a story that came out, and I'll have to find it and maybe present it. I guess like in Turkey in the late 50s, there was another skeleton that was found that was 15 feet tall. And then you have here Goliath, the king of Og. Here, 19-foot giant under an overturned oak tree in the canton of Lucerne. See, these are discoveries. All these here in this document here are ancient documentation of giants, right? Whether it's through the government or biblical or through the news media. So we should find giants, and the giants that we're actually looking for are the ones between 12 and 36 foot. And that's going to really going to confirm a lot of things in the Bible if that ever takes place. I couldn't imagine the type of information that you can get from DNA from a giant. So that's what I believe. I believe that there's tons of bones in Israel. And so I wanted to present this to you guys because there is a lot of fake information. I've showed you some pictures, and here's some more. Just about the fake pictures that are out there. And, we haven't got to that place yet where a government has said, or an archaeologist that has a very good reputation, or scientists, they come out and say, look, we found another race of human beings, and they seem to be a whole lot bigger, right? And if that ever did come out, they would just probably say, just like there are a lot of, human beings can get pretty tall, and they would just say, evolution, another, went off the branch, so to speak, during that time period. So, and that's part of the story that I do with the Grigori. I'm telling a lot of the stories. I'm telling a lot of the ancient stories with legends, and I'm doing the story based off the biblical, the book of Enoch, and the book of Giants. A lot of people have never heard about the book of Giants. It's fragmented. So you have, when you read it, it is there's a lot of different pieces that are missing, but you can piece things kind of together that match up with the Book of Enoch and match up with the Bible. But those are interesting documents that, especially the Book of Giants, a full ancient manuscript of the Book of Giants has not been found. It's just been fragments and pieces, and then scientists put all that together to tell somewhat of a story. So with the project, and that's what we're doing. We're telling the story of the Giants, and with Legends, we're telling all these different stories, and that's where my studies have come in about this subject. I used to be an investigator, and that's what I went to school for. I did a lot of law enforcement classes, a lot of time in courtrooms, and so that's how I investigated, and that's how I come across like all these other ancient texts and connect all the dots, and then put together the story. So, but I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. That you get a little bit. I tried to get a little bit of everything about the evidence and about the story and where the bones should be at, folks, because there should be a lot of bones in Israel. So if you're a giant hunter, you don't need to be searching in North America. You don't need to be searching in South America. You need to follow the path of Joshua, and that's how people will find the giant bones. Thank you, folks, for listening. The support links for the Patreon are down below in the description. Thank you very much. God bless. And with that being said, Twisted Christian out.